Rain slashed against Chicago's pavement when Amelia found the shivering boy clinging to a soaked teddy bear. Helping a lost 5-year-old seemed like common decency. She had no idea his father was Gabriel Costello, a man whose whispered name commanded citywide terror. One act of kindness sealed her fate. The late November wind whipping off Lake Michigan was notoriously unforgiving, but that Tuesday night, it felt like a physical assault. Amelia Reynolds, a 26-year-old architectural drafter, pulled her wool coat tighter against her body as she hurried down North Wabash Avenue. She had stayed late at the firm, trying to finalize the blueprints for a new commercial high-rise, and now she was paying the price. The city was a blur of neon reflections on slick, freezing asphalt. Her apartment was only 6 blocks away, but the freezing rain made every step miserable. She was about to duck under the awning of an abandoned storefront when she heard a faint, ragged sob, barely audible over the roar of passing traffic. Amelia froze. She turned, squinting into the dark recess of a narrow alleyway, wedged between a darkened deli and a dry cleaner. Beside a rusted dumpster, huddled into a tight ball, was a child. She cautiously stepped into the alley, the beam of a distant streetlight illuminating the scene. It was a little boy, no older than 5. He was wearing an oversized, soaking wet jacket that looked bizarrely expensive. A miniature Loro Piana cashmere coat, ruined by the mud. He had no shoes on, just soaked black socks, and his tiny hands were fiercely clutching a saturated plush bear. "Hey," Amelia said softly, crouching down despite the puddles soaking through her tights. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here? Where are your parents?" The boy flinched, pressing himself harder against the brick wall. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his lips were tinged blue. "Are you hurt?" she asked, keeping her voice low and steady. She dug into her tote bag for her phone, intending to dial 911, but cursed under her breath. The screen was black. The battery had died an hour ago at the office. She looked back at the boy. Leaving him here to find a payphone or an open business was out of the question. He was rapidly approaching hypothermia. "I'm Amelia," she said, taking off her own dry scarf and slowly wrapping it around his small neck. He didn't pull away this time. "I'm going to take you somewhere warm, okay? Just down the street. We'll get you some hot chocolate and call your mom and dad." When she reached out, the boy hesitated, then grabbed her hand. His fingers were like ice. He was startlingly light, burying his face into the collar of her coat. She practically ran the remaining 2 blocks to Pete's 2-4, Our Diner, a greasy spoon on the corner of State Street that catered to night shift workers and insomniacs. Pushing through the glass doors, the bell jingled, announcing their arrival into the warm, bacon-scented air. "Jesus, Amelia," said Pete, the burly owner, wiping down the counter. "You brought a stray? He's freezing, Pete. My phone is dead. Bring me a stack of towels and some hot water, please. And I need to use the landline." Amelia set the boy in a back booth, peeling off his ruined, expensive coat and wrapping him in the thick cotton towels. Pete rushed over. She ordered hot chocolate and a plate of fries, hoping the salt and sugar would shock his system back to life. "What's your name, buddy?" Amelia asked gently as she rubbed his arms. "Leo," the boy whispered, his voice raspy. "Okay, Leo. Do you know your mum or dad's phone number? Or where you live?" Leo shook his head, taking a timid sip of the hot chocolate. "Bad men came," he mumbled. "In the house. My nanny told me to run and hide in the secret hole, but I ran outside. I ran really far." Amelia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. A home invasion? She immediately picked up Pete's landline behind the counter and dialed the police. The dispatcher took the information, sounding overwhelmed by the weather-related accidents across the city, but promised to send a squad car when one freed up. Amelia returned to the booth. "The police are coming to help find your dad, Leo." At the word dad, Leo looked up. "My dad is Gabriel. He's going to be really mad at the bad men." Pete, who was pouring coffee a few feet away, suddenly stopped. The coffee pot hovered in midair, a dark spill forming on the linoleum. He turned around, his face suddenly drained of color. "What did he say his father's name was?" "Gabriel," Amelia said, confused by Pete's reaction. Pete looked at the boy's dark, sharp features, then down at the ruined cashmere coat draped over the chair. A look of sheer panic crossed the older man's face. "Amelia, you need to leave. You need to leave right now and take him to the precinct yourself." "What? Why?" "The police are on their way." Before Pete could explain, the diner's front windows were suddenly washed in blinding white headlights. 3 black, heavily tinted Cadillac Escalades abruptly mounted the curb, completely blocking the street. The diner's bell didn't just jingle. The door was violently shoved open. 5 men in dark, tailored suits stepped inside. They didn't look like police. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency, fanning out and locking the front door behind them. The few patrons in the diner froze, intuitively understanding that sudden, lethal violence had just walked into the room. Then, a 6th man entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal overcoat that looked perfectly dry despite the storm. His face was all sharp angles and cold, dark eyes that swept the room with predatory calculation. The sheer gravity of his presence seemed to suck the oxygen out of the diner. "Papa!" Leo cried out, scrambling out of the booth and dropping his towel. The man's terrifying facade cracked for a fraction of a second. He dropped to one knee, catching the boy as Leo hurled himself into his arms. He buried his face in his son's hair, letting out a breath that sounded like a ragged prayer. Amelia stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched as one of the men in suits walked behind the counter, ripped the landline cord out of the wall, and casually handed Pete a thick stack of $100 bills. "No police," the suited man said quietly to Pete. "This didn't happen." Gabriel Costello stood up, lifting his son into his arms. He turned his dark, penetrating gaze onto Amelia. The silence in the diner was absolute. "You," Gabriel said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded total obedience. The interior of the Escalade smelled of expensive leather and rain. Amelia sat stiffly on the passenger side, her wet hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from her, Gabriel Costello was wrapping his son in a dry, heated blanket produced from a hidden compartment. She had tried to refuse getting into the vehicle, arguing that she lived nearby and just wanted to go home. But 2 of Gabriel's men had simply flanked her, offering a silent, undeniable insistence. Now, the convoy was gliding smoothly through the flooded streets of Chicago, bypassing red lights as if the traffic laws didn't apply to them. My men tracked his GPS locator to a 3-block radius, but the signal was scrambled, Gabriel said, breaking the silence. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on his sleeping son. The police scanner picked up a call from a diner about a lost boy. "Yes," Amelia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He was freezing in an alley. I just wanted to get him safe." Gabriel finally looked at her. His eyes were the color of obsidian, impossible to read but profoundly intimidating. "Do you know who I am?" "No," Amelia answered honestly. "But judging by the way you shut down a public restaurant and terrorized a sweet old man, I'm guessing you aren't an accountant." A faint, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. "My name is Gabriel Costello." He watched her face carefully, waiting for the inevitable realization. When Amelia only offered a blank stare, the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease a fraction. "I am a businessman, and unfortunately, my business sometimes attracts enemies. Tonight, those enemies bypassed my security and entered my home while I was away." He looked down at Leo, his jaw tightening. They almost got it. Amelia felt a wave of nausea. She had read about the Costello family in the local papers, usually buried in the metro section regarding union disputes, mysterious shipping crate disappearances, and federal indictments that always mysteriously fell apart before trial. He wasn't just a mobster. He was the head of the most powerful organized crime syndicate in the Midwest. "I want to go home," Amelia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Please, I helped your son. I don't want anything to do with this." "I didn't see anything." Gabriel reached inside his coat and pulled out a sleek, black metal card and a burner phone. He placed them on the seat next to her. "You saved my blood. In my world, a debt of that magnitude is never ignored. If you ever need anything, money, protection, a problem solved, you call the number on that card." "You have my word, Amelia Reynolds." She blinked, startled. "How do you know my full name?" "My men ran the facial recognition from the diner's security cameras before we walked in," he stated matter-of-factly, as if hacking private CCTV was standard protocol. The SUV pulled to a smooth stop. Amelia looked out the window and realized they were parked directly in front of her modest brownstone apartment building in Lincoln Park. She hadn't given them her address. "Leave the card," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. She opened the door, letting the freezing wind whip inside. "I don't want your money, and I don't want your favors. Take care of your son, Mr. Costello. Keep him out of the rain. She slammed the door and ran up the steps of her building, fumbling with her keys. She didn't look back, but she knew the black SUVs waited until she was safely inside before pulling away. For 3 days, Amelia tried to convince herself that the incident was a bizarre, isolated nightmare. She went to work at the drafting firm. She bought her morning coffee. She ignored the news, but the illusion of safety shattered on a Friday evening. She was walking back from the grocery store, holding a brown paper bag, when she noticed a silver sedan idling near the corner of her street. A man in a heavy coat was leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette. As she approached, he dropped the cigarette and stepped directly into her path. "Amelia, right?" the man said. He had a thick, brutal face with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "Excuse me," Amelia said, trying to step around him. He moved, blocking her again. "Word on the street is, you spent some quality time with Gabriel Costello's kid the other night. You practically saved the little prince's life." Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man grabbed her arm, his grip like a vice. Her grocery bag tore, spilling apples and canned soup onto the wet pavement. "My boss, Vincent, is very curious about you. He thinks if Costello owes you a favor, maybe you're valuable to him. Maybe you're the new leverage." "Let go of me!" Amelia screamed, struggling violently. The man raised his other hand, holding a syringe. Crack. The sound was like a whip. The man holding Amelia suddenly stiffened, his eyes rolling back in his head, before he collapsed onto the sidewalk like a puppet with its strings cut. Blood began to pool rapidly from a wound in his shoulder. Amelia screamed, backing away in horror. Tires screeched as a black SUV, identical to the ones from Tuesday night, swerved violently onto the sidewalk, pinning the silver sedan against a brick wall. The doors flew open. 3 men in tactical gear poured out, weapons drawn and suppressed. Before Amelia could run, a familiar figure stepped out of the back of the SUV. Gabriel Costello. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit this time. He wore a black tactical sweater and leather gloves. His face was a mask of pure, lethal fury. He stepped over the groaning, bleeding man on the ground without a glance, walking straight toward Amelia, who was trembling violently against the wall. "I told you," Gabriel said, his voice eerily calm despite the violence surrounding them. "My business attracts enemies. The Romanos found out who interrupted their kidnapping attempt. You followed me?" Amelia gasped, staring at the blood on the pavement. "I was protecting my investment," he corrected smoothly. He looked down at her, his dark eyes softening just a fraction as he saw her terror. He took off his coat and draped it over her shivering shoulders. "Your life as you knew it ended the moment you picked up my son in that alley, Amelia. If I leave you here, you'll be dead by morning." "No," she sobbed, shaking her head. "I want to go back to my life." Gabriel stepped closer, invading her space, his presence overwhelming. "That life is gone," he said quietly, gripping her arms to steady her. "Now, you belong under my protection, whether you want it or not." He didn't give her a choice. He pulled her toward the waiting SUV, pulling her deep into a violent world she had never asked to be a part of. Rain battered the bulletproof glass of the SUV as they sped northward, leaving the glowing skyline of Chicago behind. Amelia sat frozen in the leather seat. Gabriel's heavy tactical coat swallowed her trembling frame. The metallic tang of blood from the sidewalk encounter still lingered in the air, a visceral reminder that her quiet, predictable life as an architectural drafter was entirely gone. Beside her, Gabriel Costello was a statue of barely contained violence, his jaw clamped shut while he tapped out rapid, encrypted messages on a mobile device. They turned off the main highway and glided down a private, winding drive heavily flanked by ancient oak trees. Massive wrought-iron gates, adorned with a subtle crest, swung open automatically. The estate was nestled deep within Lake Forest, Illinois, a sprawling Tudor Revival masterpiece, originally designed in the 1920s by the famed architect Howard Van Doren Shaw. Under normal circumstances, Amelia would have marveled at the asymmetrical brickwork, the steep pitched roofs, and the intricate limestone detailing. Tonight, however, it simply looked like a beautiful prison. Armed guards, holding matte black rifles with practiced ease, patrolled the perimeter. The SUV came to a halt beneath a grand porte-cochere. "Stay close to me," Gabriel commanded, his voice slicing through the heavy silence of the vehicle. Amelia obeyed, her legs feeling like lead as she stepped onto the cobblestone driveway. The heavy oak front door was pulled open by a man who looked distinctly out of place in the grand foyer. He was older, with silver hair neatly slicked back, wearing a tailored three-piece suit. His eyes, however, were sharp and assessing, carrying the same lethal weight as Gabriel's. "Matteo," Gabriel acknowledged with a curt nod. "Status? Perimeter is locked down, boss." The Romanos have gone quiet since the hit on Wabash Avenue, but Vincent is furious. "We have a team scrubbing the street. The local PD will rule it a gang-related drive-by." Matteo shifted his gaze to Amelia, his expression unreadable. "And the guest?" "Amelia Reynolds. She stays in the East Wing. No one touches her. No one questions her. She has full clearance inside the house, but she does not cross the threshold of the front door without my explicit authorization." Matteo bowed his head slightly. "Understood." Amelia found her voice, though it shook. "I have a job. I have deadlines at my firm. You can't just lock me in here, Mr. Costello. I won't say anything to the police. I swear." Gabriel stopped halfway up the grand staircase and turned to look down at her. The crystal chandelier cast harsh shadows across the sharp planes of his face. "Your firm believes you took an emergency leave of absence for family health issues. Your rent has been paid for the next 6 months. If you walk out of those doors, Vincent Romano will not ask you polite questions about what you saw. He will torture you for weeks just to send me a message, and then he will dump your body in the Chicago River." He descended 2 steps, closing the distance between them until she had to tilt her head back to meet his obsidian eyes. "I am keeping you here because you saved my son, and my conscience will not allow me to let you die for it. You will adjust." Over the next 2 weeks, Amelia was forced to do exactly that. The estate was a gilded cage of staggering opulence. Her suite in the East Wing featured a marble fireplace, a king-size mahogany bed, and windows overlooking a manicured courtyard. Her meals were prepared by a private chef, and an absurdly expensive wardrobe had been delivered, filled with silks and cashmeres that fit her perfectly. Yet, the omnipresence of armed security was suffocating. Her only solace was Leo. The 5-year-old was deeply traumatized by the initial home invasion that had sent him running into the storm. He rarely spoke to his nanny and recoiled from the imposing guards, but he sought Amelia out constantly. He would knock on her door with his damp teddy bear, asking her to draw with him. Amelia, utilizing her architectural drafting supplies, sketched grand castles, intricate bridges, and sprawling cities, patiently teaching the boy how to hold the graphite pencils. Gabriel watched these interactions from a distance. The ruthless Mafia boss, feared from Detroit to street, Louis, transformed when he looked at his son. One evening, as Amelia was sitting on the rug of the library with Leo, she noticed Gabriel standing in the doorway, a half-empty glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked exhausted, the weight of his criminal empire pressing down on his broad shoulders. "He hasn't smiled like that since his mother died," Gabriel said quietly, stepping into the room. Amelia looked up, startled. It was the most personal piece of information he had offered since bringing her here. "What happened to her?" "A car bomb," Gabriel stated, his voice devoid of emotion, though his grip on the crystal glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. "It was meant for me. 3 years ago, Vincent Romano ordered the hit. The same man who tried to take Leo, the same man who put a bounty on your head." He crouched down beside them, picking up one of Amelia's architectural sketches. "You have talent. Precise. Calculated." "I like structure," Amelia replied, meeting his intense gaze. "I like things to make sense. In my world, if you calculate the load-bearing weight correctly, the building stands. In your world, everything seems to be built on sand and blood." Gabriel's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smirk. "My world is built on loyalty and consequence. Amelia, you are starting to understand the consequence. Soon, you will understand the loyalty." But loyalty within the Costello family was not as solid as Gabriel believed. Amelia, trained to notice structural anomalies and hidden spaces, began to realize that the danger wasn't just lurking outside the gates. It was breathing inside the house. Confinement bred a specific type of hypervigilance. Deprived of her career and her freedom, Amelia channeled her nervous energy into analyzing her surroundings. The Tudor mansion was a labyrinth of grand halls, but it also held a secondary circulatory system, the old servant corridors, laundry chutes, and archaic dumbwaiters built a century ago. Her suspicions began on a Tuesday afternoon. She was in the conservatory reading when she heard low, Urgent voices bleeding through a heavy iron grate set into the baseboard, an old heating vent connected to the basement billiard room. She knelt on the terracotta floor, pressing her ear to the cold metal. The security rotation changes at midnight on Thursday. A voice murmured. It was Lorenzo, Gabriel's younger cousin and a high-ranking capo within the organization. Amelia recognized his arrogant, slick tone instantly. Vincent wants the boy unharmed. Gabriel is the target. If you jam the primary server, the perimeter alarms will blind the guards for exactly 3 minutes. That's all the Romanos need to breach the south wall. Amelia's blood ran cold. Lorenzo was selling them out. He was the rat who had coordinated the initial home invasion, and now he was orchestrating an assassination. I want Gabriel's head, Lorenzo. A second, gravelly voice replied through the vent, presumably a Romano lieutenant on a burner phone. If he survives, we all burn. He won't survive. Thursday night. The Costello reign ends. Amelia scrambled away from the vent, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Thursday. That was tomorrow. She had to warn Gabriel. She rushed through the opulent hallways, bypassing the formal dining room and heading toward Gabriel's private study. But as she rounded the corner, a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder, violently spinning her around. Lorenzo stood there, his eyes narrowed into malicious slits. He wasn't smiling. Running laps, Miss Reynolds? He sneered, his grip tightening painfully on her collarbone. You look pale. Did you hear a ghost in the walls? Let go of me, Lorenzo, Amelia demanded, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the terror gripping her throat. I need to speak with Gabriel. My cousin is busy running an empire into the ground. Lorenzo hissed, stepping closer, crowding her against the imported silk wallpaper. He pulled a sleek, silver Beretta from his shoulder holster and tapped the cold barrel against her cheek. I think you've overstayed your welcome, sweetheart. You're a liability, an outsider playing house with a dead man. Amelia's mind raced. She was an architect. She understood physics, leverage, and momentum. Lorenzo was expecting a cowering civilian. He wasn't expecting resistance. Feigning a sob, Amelia let her knees buckle. As Lorenzo instinctively shifted his weight and lowered the gun to pull her back up, Amelia drove her heel upward with devastating force, connecting squarely with his kneecap. Bone crunched. Lorenzo howled in agony, his grip slackening just enough. Amelia shoved him backward, broke free, and bolted down the corridor. Bitch! Lorenzo roared, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing behind her, accompanied by a suppressed pfft as bullets tore into the drywall inches from her head. She didn't run toward the guards at the front entrance. Lorenzo could easily claim she had attacked him. She needed Gabriel. She sprinted toward the west wing, bursting through the heavy oak doors of Gabriel's war room. The room was filled with cigarette smoke and half a dozen imposing men leaning over tactical maps. Gabriel stood at the head of the table, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up, revealing skin covered in dark, intricate ink. He looked up, his eyes widening as Amelia careened into the room, gasping for air, a streak of plaster dust on her face from the near-miss bullets. Amelia? What the hell? Before Gabriel could finish, Lorenzo limped into the doorway, his gun raised, his face twisted in a mask of desperate rage. He aimed directly at Gabriel's chest. It's over, Gabe, Lorenzo screamed. Time seemed to fracture. Amelia, acting on pure, reckless adrenaline, didn't freeze. She grabbed a heavy, bronze paperweight from a side table and hurled it directly at Lorenzo's face. The bronze mass struck Lorenzo's wrist just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, shattering a priceless stained glass window behind Gabriel. In a fraction of a second, Gabriel cleared the distance. He didn't draw a weapon, he became one. He tackled his cousin to the mahogany floor, driving his knee into Lorenzo's chest with a sickening crack of ribs. Before Lorenzo could react, Gabriel had his own tactical blade pressed tight against the traitor's throat, drawing a thin line of crimson. The room erupted into chaos as Matteo and the other men drew their weapons, but Gabriel raised a hand, demanding absolute silence. He stared down at Lorenzo, his eyes empty of any familial warmth. You, Gabriel whispered, a sound far more terrifying than a shout. My own blood. You let the Romanos into my home? You put my son in the cold? You're weak, Gabriel. Lorenzo spat, choking on his own blood. You lost your nerve when Maria died. Vincent is taking the city. I was just surviving. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He looked up at Matteo. Take him to the basement. Find out exactly how the Romanos are breaching tomorrow night. Once he talks, handle it. Lorenzo began to thrash and scream as Matteo and two massive enforcers dragged him out of the room. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, plunging the war room into a suffocating, adrenaline-soaked silence. Gabriel stood up, wiping a drop of blood from his hand onto a handkerchief. His chest was heaving, the raw violence of his lifestyle fully exposed. He slowly turned his gaze to Amelia, who was leaning heavily against a bookshelf, clutching her stomach as shock set in. He crossed the room, stopping inches from her. He reached out, his blood-stained hand hesitating before gently cupping her face. His thumb brushed over the plaster dust on her cheek. "You threw a piece of bronze at a man holding a loaded Beretta," Gabriel said, his voice dropping an octave, filled with a dangerous mixture of awe and fury. "He was going to kill you," Amelia breathed, her whole body trembling now that the immediate threat was neutralized. "And then he was going to let Vincent Romano take Leo. I couldn't let him." Gabriel stared into her eyes. The walls he had built around himself for 3 years, visibly cracking. She wasn't just a civilian anymore. She had willingly stepped into the crossfire for his family. "I told you my world was built on consequence and loyalty," Gabriel murmured, leaning in until she could feel the heat radiating from him, the scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne enveloping her. "You have proven your loyalty, Amelia, which means I will tear this city down to its foundations before I let anyone lay a finger on you again. Tomorrow night, we don't wait for the Romanos to breach. We take the war to them." Amelia looked up at the fearsome Mafia boss, realizing with terrifying clarity that she no longer wanted to run away. She was bound to the Costello Empire, not as a prisoner, but as a protector. By Thursday evening, the bitter, freezing rain that had plagued Chicago all month morphed into a dry, biting cold. The Tudor estate in Lake Forest was locked down tighter than a Federal Reserve. Inside the grand foyer, the atmosphere crackled with a lethal, suffocating tension. Gabriel Costello was not a man who waited to be hunted. Armed with the agonizingly detailed confessions extracted from his cousin Lorenzo in the basement, Gabriel was preparing to dismantle the Romano family permanently. Amelia stood on the landing of the grand staircase, her hands gripping the polished oak railing. She watched as Gabriel strapped a Kevlar vest over his dress shirt, sliding spare magazines into his tactical rig. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers, and for a fleeting moment, the ruthless mob boss softened. He walked to the base of the stairs. "Matteo," Gabrielle said, without breaking eye contact with Amelia, "if this goes sideways tonight, you initiate Protocol Omega. You take Amelia and Leo to the private airstrip. The jet will take you to the property in Geneva. They vanish, Matteo, fully funded, completely untraceable." "Understood, boss," Matteo replied solemnly, racking the slide of his customized M4 rifle. Amelia descended the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stopped mere inches from Gabriel, the smell of gun oil and expensive cologne washing over her. "I didn't pull your son out of a freezing alley just to watch his father walk into a slaughterhouse," she said, her voice fiercely steady despite her internal terror. "You calculate the variables, Gabriel. You make sure the structure holds. You come back to us." Gabriel's gloved hand reached up, his thumb grazing her jawline. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. He leaned in, pressing a hard, lingering kiss to her forehead. "Lock the doors." The assault on the Romano stronghold was a masterclass in tactical brutality. Lorenzo had revealed that Vincent Romano was coordinating the midnight breach from a decommissioned meatpacking plant hidden deep within the Fulton Market district. It was an industrial wasteland of rusted iron and shattered brick. Gabriel's convoy didn't park discreetly. 3 heavily armored SUVs smashed directly through the chained loading dock doors, the screech of tearing metal echoing through the cavernous space. Before the dust could even settle, Gabriel's enforcers poured out. The ensuing firefight was deafening. Muzzle flashes illuminated the dark, blood-stained concrete as suppressed submachine guns tore through Vincent's unprepared perimeter guards. Matteo led the flanking maneuver, systematically clearing the catwalks. Gabriel moved through the chaos like a shadow, a predator hunting his ultimate prey. He didn't waste bullets. His progression was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient. He found Vincent Romano barricaded inside a glass-paneled foreman's office overlooking the kill zone. Vincent, a graying, heavy-set man in a ruined bespoke suit, wildly fired a revolver through the glass. Gabriel didn't flinch. He kicked the shattered doorframe inward. Vincent screamed as his right kneecap shattered, collapsing onto the grimy linoleum floor. He dropped his weapon, clutching his ruined leg, his face pale with agonizing shock. "You think this ends here, Gabe?" Vincent spat, blood speckling his lips. "The Chicago Commission won't stand for this. They'll bleed your organization dry, and that little civilian girl you're hiding, I'll have my men hunt her down just for sport." Gabriel stood over the fallen boss, his expression completely devoid of mercy. He looked at the industrial skyline of Chicago through the broken window. "The Commission gave me their blessing the moment you decided to target a 5-year-old child." Gabriel lied smoothly, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "You broke the old laws, Vincent. And as for Amelia, she is untouchable. She is Costello now." Gabriel raised his weapon, aiming directly at Vincent's chest. Wait. I have offshore accounts in the Caymans." The reigning terror of the Romano family ended with a single, deafening echo that swallowed Vincent's final plea. Gabriel returned to the Lake Forest estate just an hour before dawn. The sky was bleeding a pale, bruised purple. The house was dead silent, the perimeter guards nodding respectfully as his blood-spattered SUV rolled up the cobblestone drive. He stripped off his tactical gear in the mudroom, washing the soot and crimson from his hands. Exhaustion pulled at his bones, but a different kind of adrenaline pushed him toward the West Wing. He found Amelia in his private study. She had fallen asleep, curled up in his oversized leather armchair, an architectural blueprint of the estate's historical renovations draped over her lap. The sight of her, the brilliant, brave woman who had stepped into the crossfire to protect his family, shattered the final, frozen barriers around his heart. He approached quietly, but his shadow fell over her. She immediately sat up, taking in his disheveled hair, the minor cut on his cheek, and the heavy weariness in his posture. "It's done," Gabriel murmured, his voice incredibly rough. "Vincent is dead. The Romano threat is neutralized. You're safe, Amelia. Leo is safe." Amelia stood up, the blueprint slipping to the floor. She didn't retreat from the faint, lingering scent of violence that clung to him. She reached up, her soft, warm fingers gently tracing the sharp, tense line of his jaw. "And what about you, Gabriel?" she whispered, her eyes searching his dark gaze. Gabriel let out a ragged, shuddering breath. The walls he had built over 3 years of grief and bloodshed crumbled entirely. He wrapped his powerful arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "I am now," he rasped. The kiss was inevitable, born of terror, adrenaline, and a fierce, undeniable loyalty. It was desperate, consuming, and deeply passionate. Amelia threaded her fingers into his dark hair, pulling him closer, anchoring the feared Mafia boss to the earth. It was a collision of two vastly different worlds, forging a singular, unbreakable bond. Gabriel swept her off her feet, carrying her up the grand staircase. The king of the Chicago underworld had finally found his queen, and Amelia had found the only man capable of burning down the world to keep her warm. Amelia Reynolds traded a life of quiet blueprints for an empire built on loyalty and survival. Saving a lost child in a Chicago downpour didn't just alter her destiny, it reshaped the criminal underworld entirely. Beside Gabriel Costello, she became the fierce matriarch of a feared dynasty. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale, it was a beautifully dangerous pact, forged in storm, sealed in blood, and bound forever.